Our next lecture will be given by Dr. Vanessa Portugal, who is an assistant professor in global history of art at the Trinity College, Dublin. Please welcome her on the stage. And thank you for being here. Sorry, one more quick mention. If you want a simultaneous Czech translation to Czech language, it's happening one floor lower. Pokud chcete poslouchat raději v češtině, simultánní překlad probíhá o patro níže.
Thank you very much. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to present my work and you for being here. I'm going to take you in a journey to 17th century Mexico, then called New Spain. It was the 10th of January of 1655 when the student of Canon Gaspar Rivero Vasconcelos accused Melchor Pérez de Soto, an architect of the Cathedral of Mexico City, to the tribunal of the Holy Inquisition. The Holy Inquisition was the judicial body of the Catholic Church that regulated the social life in the Spanish West Kingdom by overlooking the laws related to religious practices, moral behavior, and political inclinations. Pérez de Soto was accused for having books on prescribed topics, such as astrology. The Holy Inquisition incarcerated Pérez de Soto and confiscated his library. The process, which lasted 3 months, is thoroughly described along 13 files. This case is normal in its accusation against a person for having forbidden knowledge, but it becomes exemplary for it outlines information regarding the accuser, the accused, and the whole divination culture in 17th century New Spain. The sources indicate that the accuser, Gaspar Rivero, was of Portuguese ascendancy and was also a mulatto, that is, a person of darkened skin. Gaspar Rivero had himself, well, we'll see why it's that important later. Gaspar Rivero had himself faced an inquisitorial case. He had been accused of casting astrological judgments or using astrology for divination purposes in 1650 by Diego Pérez, his consultant, after Gaspar Rivero had consulted wrongfully on a matter. As it was customary for inquisitorial processes against astrology in New Spain, the case against Gaspar Rivero focused on the physical evidence, that is, the papers that allowed him to cast astrological judgments. However, it is evident that Gaspar Rivero's social relationship helped him to receive a sentence that allowed him to continue his life as accountant for the Cathedral of Mexico City, as well as to continue his studies on canonical law. It was rumored, for instance, that he used astrology to help the religious community, for instance, to find lost items, and particularly that he used to serve Sebastián Páez, a custodial officer for the Inquisition. Gaspar Rivero's accusations did little to dwindle his social status, and years later he was employed by the cathedral's architect Melchor Pérez de Soto as reader for his Latin books. This allowed Gaspar to know Pérez de Soto's library and eventually to accuse him for having forbidden knowledge. Pérez de Soto had also a particular standing. Although not able to read Latin, he exchanged books on astrology with Captain Pedro Porter Casanate, with whom he was also commissioned by the Vice Kingdom to explore the unknown lands to the west. And Pérez de Soto had also a fame amongst the community for being able to make divinations by looking at the palm of a person, that is, of chiromancy, which was a forbidden practice. As usual, the process focused on the examination of the evidence, that is, the books that Pérez de Soto had. However, Pérez de Soto was incarcerated for 3 months and eventually died. He was assassinated in jail by his fellow prisoner, Diego Cerillo, who ultimately also killed himself. Today, we only have estimations of the extent of his library, which could have consisted of any number of books, from 1,502, according to some historian, and proved by Romero de Terreros, to 1663, proved by Leonard Irving. Now, given Perez's automastery of chiromancy, it wouldn't be surprising that he held editions of Jerónimo de Cortés' Physiognomy and Many Secrets of Nature, which is the one that you can see here, and which he was edited in 1645 Valencia. It is also possible, if not more likely, that he also had an edition of Johannes Taisner, Opus Mathematicus, which was printed in Cologne in 1562. This book can be understood as a mathematical and astrological work, giving the cultural context and understanding of mathematics in its relation with celestial and terrestrial harmony. And this book was dedicated to chiromancy. Here we can see the Czech copy from the National Library in Prague. 17th and 18th century New Spanish indexes of proscribed books highlight the popularity of this particular one from Taisner by referencing it as colloquially Taisinero, that is the Book of Taisner, or Taisner's book. Given the short name for the work, which doesn't even include a mention of its title, one is surprised that there are no other surviving editions of Taisner, Opus Mathematicus. Oh, well, there are actually no surviving books in New Spanish libraries, which is probably due to the committed expurgatory labor of the Inquisition. However, that 3 out of 6 inquisitorial processes during the 18th century against the practice of palm reading or chiromancy further indicate the extent of the practice. Taisner divides his mathematical work in 8 books to explain almost all the lines that the reader practitioner can possibly encounter in someone's hand. It shows 31 real-life cases of accurate interpretation, along with representations of the hands. The Taisinero then explains the astrological relations of the parts of the hand with the planetary characteristics as a base to interpret the lines and shapes visible on hands. As we can see, the diagrams are very neat and didactic, combining text and image before presenting the reader with specific forms for interpretation. For instance, here we can see the interpretation of the shapes that can appear in the higher part of the hand, the one that connects with the fingers. Taisner also provides images that showcase a variety of physiognomic interpretations which would have served as a marker of interest for the emerging cosmopolitan society, framed by hierarchical colonial social constraints based on lineage. Or rephrasing this, the illustrated physiognomic interpretations of the Taisinero would have served the new Spanish inhabitants to make some of the characters of unknown neighbors. However, I believe the popularity of chiromancy as a divinatory practice in New Spain not only resides on the human interest for knowing what is yet to come, to avoid the anxiety in an uncertain life, to make an idea of the neighbor, but also, I argue, because of the long history of the use of a hand as a memory device in New Spain that had been cemented its status as a tool for engaging with the world. There existed a long medieval tradition that taught music employing the hand as a mnemonic device. The technique devised by Benedict monk and music theorist Guido of Arezzo in the 10th century was employed to assist singers in their learning to sight sing. The system for music annotation then will follow a sequence that started with the thumb. We can see here an example from the 15th century that shows the geographical dissemination across time for this method to learn the solfegging. So extended was this technique that in the 13th century, Michael Scott quotes Boetius as well as Guido of Arezzo in his first 2 books of his great introduction to astrology, cosmology, and physiognomy, the Liber Introductorius. These chapters are dedicated to music, where he delves on the harmony of the spheres through the relationship between music and astronomy, before presenting a theory of music. The relationship between the mathematical harmony of music and the passing of time is further examined with the establishing of the Gregorian calendar. In the 16th century Spanish context, musicologist Francisco de Salinas has an important role to unite these mathematical sciences. Francisco de Salinas was well educated in Greek, Latin, and mathematics. He served at the chapel of the Archbishop of Compostela, Don Pedro Gómez de Sarmiento y Ulloa, and to the Viceroy of Naples, Fernando Álvarez de Toledo y Pimentel, 3rd Duke of Alba, and he obtained the seat of music at the University of Salamanca, where he established a friendship with the Augustinian theologian and astronomer Luis de León, who was consulted on the establishing of the Gregorian calendar. Francisco de Salinas' musicological interest in the speculative music, which studied the science of mathematics of music, in the quadrivium, the speculative music was part of the mathematics studies, together with arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. He developed a text regarding the Gregorian calendar, the Annotations, Annotaciones, where he explains the reform and its improvements, and very importantly, exhibits the complex arithmetic operations through his method of counting with the articulations of his hand, basically employing Guidonian technique to pneumatic mathematical calculations. Around the same time, Around the same time, we see the hand as a memory device arriving to the Americas. The territory conquered by the Spanish crown, now called New Spain, and whose population, according to the crown, required to be converted to Christianity. In this missionary effort, printed images such as these were employed initially by Franciscan friars as memory aids to preach in diverse indigenous languages across vast territories where it could be difficult to carry many books. The use of the hand as a device allowed the friars internalizing of biblical ideas for preaching. As different Mendicant orders arrived to the territory, prints of the hand continued to serve for missionary purposes as well as for meditation, based on the Jesuit spiritual exercises, where the use of the hand served as visual key to prevent the mind to diverting to diverse, contrary, or even dangerous ideas. In New Spain, the development of local print shops, which always required a royal permission, would allow the editors to reuse the hand matrix for publishing diverse areas of knowledge. Through this image, we see the hand memory device continues to be employed into the 18th century in New Spain. Buenaventura Francisco de Ossorio, presbyter of the Archbishop of Mexico, published in 1737, Mexico City, a small treatises for the computing of time and the liturgical celebrations, which he dedicates to Antonio Gamboa y Riaño, holder of the seat of astrology and mathematics at the Royal University of Mexico. It presents a manual method for the computing of time with a hand, which he titles The Prodigious Hand. Buenaventura instructs to consider the 3 articulations of each of the 5 fingers of one hand as a mnemonic device to locate letters, that is, the Dominical letters, and numbers for counting days, months, and years. The correct calculation will allow the reader to name the exact date for future and past mobile dates of liturgical celebrations. For instance, Ash Wednesday, Palm Sunday, Easter, and calendars. This computing method is based on determining the epochs, indications, and the golden ratio. He mentions that the calendar calculations are based on various authors and on the work of the Jesuit astronomer and mathematician Christopher Clavius, who was a member of the Vatican Commission in charge of correcting the calendar, which led to the establishment of the Gregorian calendar. In his prologue, Buenaventura mentions the importance for a wise man to know the curiosities, so he will not suffer embarrassment for his ignorance, and underlines the importance of having this knowledge for a clergyman. He concludes with a strong statement highlighting that acquiring this, let us say, mathematical and Christian knowledge will prove wrong to those who claim that Americans are uncultivated and illiterate people. His justification of the efficiency of this method is remarkable. He quotes Isaiah 40:12 to argue that, likewise God could embrace and measure the immense oceans and spheres of the sky, so can this harmonious hand. He is relying on the biblical premise that affirms that a man was created on the image of God. Therefore, man's hand is equivalent, theoretically, to God's hand. In this sense, he continues, saying that the prodigious hand, that it contains those hefty spheres and measures them, weights them, and counterweights all of their movements, their operations, their times, even though the many variations that every day of the stars and planets experiment. Even at the eve of the Enlightenment, Buenaventura presents not only a simple tool for computing time, but one that is able to carry the creation and all its harmonious movement in a human hand. This framing recovers the understanding of human as a microcosm of the celestial spheres, and the hand as a repository of the planetary movement. The presbyter does well on applying the biblical sentence associated with planetary physiognomy. This shall be a sign in his hand, and as an instrument before his eyes. Thank you. I suppose, do you have any questions?
Do we have any questions around here?
I do have a question. David will first.
I'm just curious if you use the method of memory techniques to the hand yourself as an academic.
Yeah, no, actually, no. No, it's I suppose I try to rely more on text, as one can see, but I think no, I like to draw or to create more. Yeah.
You said, you mentioned a very interesting thing, that man was created in God's image, and therefore man's hand is the hand of God, or is somehow similar to the hand of God. Could you perhaps write it down into my diary and sign it?
Can it be a copy of how I wrote it nicely?